a more sweeping and inclusive electoral mandate, which translates into a greater political legitimacy, majorities in both houses of the American legislature, more experience, and a more ambitious agenda with what appears to be a more ideologically cohesive team. Viewers, very few presidents in American history have either had the whole of America or most of the globe at their feet. Trump is one of them. His widely publicized mission is to make America great again, as he says. The question is, at whose cost will America attain this primacy? Or with the electoral campaign over the populist incumbent, will now trade stump staples, traduce bellicosity, vengefulness for statesmanship, transforming into a force for global good? Will that happen? Will we see Trump emerge as a force for global good? India remembers Trump in his Howdy Modi avatar, a friend of India, well-wisher of Hindus, and an admirer of Modi. But that was the hoary past. In the run-up to his second term, with Trump having bracketed Tariff King India with China, vowed to expel immigrants who he claims are interlopers stealing American jobs and pledging to put America first, the future looks pregnant with uncertainties. The question then is, can India still count on Trump? There are others, of course, who believe that India and US will pick up the threads from where Trump left off after his first term. The prevailing view in India is that Trump is most concerned about losing out the race for global supremacy to China. China is enemy number one. That his claim on Greenland and the declaration to take back control of Panama Canal were not empty bluster, but a testament to his intent on checkmating China. That his entire tariff policy is aimed at creating an equitable trading system at China's cost. That proposed technological sanctions on China are to preempt its rise as a challenger. If Trump's agenda is to contain China, if it is to restrain it, he will need to keep India in good humor, possibly handing New Delhi an advantage globally, or at least in the Trump scheme of things. There is talk already of a Trump visit to India in March, in just a few weeks, and some significant political economic concessions to New Delhi. Viewers, as I told you, in a break from the past, in a complete break from the past, for the first time, global leaders have been invited for an oath-taking ceremony of an American president, borrowing perhaps a leaf out of Prime Minister Modi's book of using the oath-taking ceremony itself as an opportunity to do diplomacy. Mr. Trump has invited some important and consequential global leaders. The list is long. Giorgia Meloni, Italian Prime Minister; Javier Milei, Argentine President Viktor Orban; Hungarian Prime Minister S. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister to represent the India bloc. Viewers, and I'm saying bloc because other foreign ministers of the Quad countries will also be there. So the Quad really is getting a bit of an exposure tonight. Also, of course, viewers, we are being told that the Chinese Vice President will be there. That's a big statement to make. Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwai to represent Japan. And as I told you, the Foreign Minister also of Australia. All of these people, viewers, are there amongst many other dignitaries from the business world. Even Nita and Mukesh Ambani are there. And there is, of course, huge anticipation, as once again many say that this is going to shift narratives, attitudes globally, perhaps even redefine geopolitics as we know it today. Well, viewers, let's get a sense of what lies ahead, what is in store, not just for the world, but more specifically for India. And that is what our focus will be. And I want to go straight across to Dhruv Jaishankar, Executive Director of ORF America. Thank you, Mr. Jaishankar, for speaking to me this evening. India is, of course, one of a handful of countries who has been invited to send a representative, who in this case happens to be Mr. Jaishankar, your father, as a matter of fact. What is the significance of this invitation to India, and specifically Mr. Jaishankar, who's going to represent India?
No, so I think it appears, as you rightly mentioned, this is unusual in the US to invite foreign leaders to the inauguration of a US president. The US president's inauguration is usually a very grand affair. This year it has been moved indoors because of the severe cold, but it's usually a very grand affair. I've attended in the past. For example, they have thousands of people who come to attend, usually supporters of the incoming president. I'd say there are three categories of leaders who have been invited this time from abroad. One is President Trump extended an invitation to Xi Jinping, which was reported widely. Xi Jinping is not coming, but Han Zheng, who's the 7th ranking member of the Politburo Standing Committee in China, will be in attendance. He's also given the title of vice president. Secondly, there are leaders, both elected and in opposition, who are seen as politically aligned with Trump globally. And you mentioned some of those: Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy, Javier Milei, President of Argentina, but also some leaders of the opposition from France, UK, and others. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for example, I think will be here amongst others. So you do have some people who you can characterize them as right-wing leaders from around the world, but people who have an ideological affinity or parallels with the Trump administration and the Trump worldview. So several of them are here. I would say the third category, and I'll put India in this category, are those that have a strategic importance for the US, and chief amongst them are the Quad. So all three Quad foreign ministers are here, visiting for the inauguration, attending, and then there's expectation, there's been a report that tomorrow they'll have a Quad foreign ministers meeting. This will be the first engagement of the new US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is expected to be confirmed today.
Very interesting. But India sort of being called in amongst all the other Quad foreign ministers, you seem to suggest, is a sign that Trump will continue to back Quad. Now, Quad is always seen, really, by China, at least by Beijing, and many others in the region, as something opposed to China. Now, it's also interesting that we've seen an outreach to China. You yourself mentioned that there was an invitation to Xi Jinping. He didn't come. The vice president is there. How do you read this? What's going on here? Trump was extremely truculent when it came to China.
No, and that may continue. We'll see. I think the first few months we'll see different types of engagement with China, where both sides will try to both Washington and Beijing will try to feel out each other and see where they can cooperate, where there will be competition. I would say the default setting for both sides is competitive today. There's a great deal of mistrust on almost every issue. You can go through, trade or fentanyl, which is a big issue for Trump, with illicit drug smuggling, to migration, security, defense. You mentioned even some of the strategic considerations at play. So it is a very competitive relationship, and I think they're trying to find opportunities to cooperate. Trump seems to think, despite his experiences in his first term, that there may be avenues to cooperate. And one of the things he's holding out, as has been this has been getting a lot of attention, has been the TikTok ban issue, which has been upheld by the US Supreme Court. And I think we'll see what happens in the next 24 hours or so, but there's reports now that they will get a 90-day waiver. But let's see, he's holding that out as a bargaining chip with China. So I think let's see what plays out. I think both sides will feel out each other, but there is a great deal of distrust and a very severe lack of regular contacts, including military contacts between the US and China. So this was he's feeling out the Chinese, and the Chinese are feeling him out. That's what's happening. At the same time, I think there is an understanding about cooperation. Trump is very skeptical of treaty allies. He believes that the European allies, like in NATO, Canada, others, are taking advantage of the US. And so for him, things like Quad are actually a bonus. He's not giving India anything. He's not, but there's an alignment of interest. So for that reason, I think there is a continued investment in the Quad. He doesn't seem, and his administration does not seem, they want to find ways to take it forward. The Biden administration was always very careful about not portraying the Quad as some sort of counter to China. that this is a sort of peacetime competition. It is not meant to be. Let's see how Trump decides to play the Quad.
Well, just give me a second because I want to describe some of those pictures that have just started coming in. There is Trump and his wife, Melania, who have left their accommodation and they're moving towards the venue, which in this case, of course, the entire thing will take place, in fact, indoors. That's the White House, viewers. That's the outside shot. You can see Trump's cars there already lined up. So he's already inside. Vehicle is called the Beast. There he is with Biden, who's the outgoing president. And this is really where things are going to take place. Now, Dhruva Jaishankar bitterly cold, of course, in Washington, and therefore this entire inaugural has been moved indoors, if I'm not mistaken. But the chill, as you talk about, extends, of course, globally. There's also Russia to contend with, there's Iran to contend with, there are hostilities that are still sort of looming large in the Gulf, in the Middle East, Syria, etc. So there are a lot of things that need to be unraveling. But I just want to come back to this point that you were making about China, and this is specific to China. What does Trump expect from China? What is he expecting to hear from China?
I think he's hoping that China is able to deliver on some of the issues that matter to him. And these issues, on some of them, he's been very consistent about. I mean, even before he was president the first time, continuing throughout, he wants help on reducing the trade deficit. With China is the single largest trade deficit for the US, as it is for India and for other economies. So reducing the trade deficit is one. Managing inflation is the other. So, these are slightly contradictory because if he applies tariffs on China, then it could contribute to inflation in the US. So how he manages that will be very interesting to see. Then I think he thinks Beijing has a role to play in helping to resolve some global issues. The war in Ukraine, he has spoken about, it may seem ridiculous, but he has spoken about this himself, working with China to get Putin to stop, to reach some accommodation in Ukraine. And then also North Korea and denuclearization of North Korea, another thing he feels strongly about and he has spoken about at length. So he does see these opportunities for China, but he's not going to expect these for free. And so I think there will be some very hard bargaining with Beijing, as there will be hard bargaining with India on some other issues and with the Europeans on other issues and Canada as well. So he's not, he's a businessman and he approaches things in this, what's in it for me. If you recall what happened in 2017, he invited Xi Jinping to Mar-a-Lago, his home in Florida, for a one-on-one. It seemed initially to have gone very well. Then within a few months, he believed that basically Xi Jinping was taking him for a ride and not giving him anything that he had wanted. And so suddenly by the late summer of that year, he took on a much more confrontational approach to China. So let's see what happens now. He's exploring possibilities.
He's exploring possibilities. Now you sort of seem to suggest that he's transactional. How is India placed in the Trump administration scheme of things right now?
I mean, I've been getting that question a lot from lots of people. We've had some Indian business delegations and others coming here in the last few weeks, and that's top of mind for them, obviously. I think, look, the default setting is he doesn't see India as a first order problem, and this is a good thing. The two countries, the adversarial relationships that the US has, you mentioned some of them, China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea would be amongst the top. Then he has trouble with the allies. He thinks the allies are getting something for free from the US, so yep. NATO, Japan, Canada. India is not in neither of those categories. So I think the default setting is a positive one. That being said, I think there's some issues he has. The two, I think, that will be the most urgent because they'll come up soon. One is on trade. India enjoys quite a large trade surplus with the US, and this is noted. So he's going to try, with China, with India, with others, try to reduce that trade deficit, and is going to want to see steps that India is taking to try to reduce that trade deficit. So that, I think, will be one, and he will use tariffs as a negotiating tactic there. So if some not accommodation, but if some deal is struck, and a similar deal was successfully negotiated in 2020, but the US finally did not accept it at that time. So tariffs and trade will be one issue where India will be in the hot seat for a little while. Second is immigration. Both undocumented migrants, people who have overstayed their visas, or they're quite a large number, but also the legal migration regime And on that, there are different views even amongst Trump's advisors. We saw this play out in the last 2 months. People like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy would like to see more legal migration from India. They believe that the US needs talent in this competition, that talent is going to come from India amongst other places. Whereas others in the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, believe very strongly that the US is more than an economy. It is a culture, and that culture is very much rooted in a sense of Caucasian culture, Christian culture, and that people from other religions and other ethnicities should not be welcomed as much. So I think that there will be this push and pull amongst some of Trump's advisors. Initially, Trump seems to have sided with Musk and Ramaswamy, but let's see if that continues.
So what are the non-negotiables for Trump's base, the MAGA movement as it's called? What will they sort of say, okay, fine, we'll give you some space here, but I'm sorry, on certain other issues, there's no way we're going to give you any elbow room?
I'm not sure. I think, even on some big issues, they have pushed for, they tried to push for a government shutdown on some issues. They eventually were not able to do that. I mean, this is before, again, Trump's coming to power. This is a extension of government spending. But the terms of that, they were trying to essentially hold hostage in Congress. Secondly, there was a contest over the leadership of the Senate. Trump's preferred candidate, the one backed by a lot of MAGA people, did not win. So I think this idea, I'm not sure they would necessarily be able to have their way on every issue. But you're right, on some things it will be quite clear. I think ultimately this is really about jobs and a feeling of lack of opportunity. For lack of economic opportunity. So I think if there is inflation, if there's not a return to jobs and good paying jobs and manufacturing and a sense of security and stability, if the stock market does poorly, I think those economic factors, a combination of those, will really make a lot of the MAGA movement quite disgruntled. But I'd say the second issue apart from the economy is the border. The border, I think we are expecting to see an announcement today or tomorrow on a state of emergency on the southern border in the US. This will give the president quite sweeping powers to do a lot, to requisition a lot of funds, to build a border wall, and also use the security services in a way that they haven't in some time. So I think the border and economy are the two big issues for the MAGA crowd.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jaishankar, for speaking to me this evening. Let's open this up. Kamal Sibal, ex-Foreign Secretary, needs no introduction. Also, Tom Rose, someone who has been an advisor, we're told, to Trump, is here with us. Both these gentlemen, thank you very much. In about 45 to 50 minutes, we're going to see, of course, the historic oath-taking ceremony. Historic only because this time, breaking from tradition, certain foreign dignitaries have been invited, heads of state, etc., etc. But let me come to you straight, Mr. Sibal. Will Trump make India a lower priority, preferring to focus more on China? Is he going to be distracted by a lot of issues that he needs to set right at home, the expectations from the MAGA base? How will all this sort of play out? We're already hearing, and this is all source-based information, that Trump might in fact be planning a trip to India in March, which obviously sends out signals of its own. So how are you seeing this?
Well, firstly, we shouldn't have the illusion that India is central to Trump's program. India is a valuable partner, will continue to be one, and our relationship will continue to grow. But if we begin to constantly look for signals whether enough attention is being paid to us as compared to attention being paid to China or some other issues, then we'll be constantly disappointed. The thing is, you first attend to your serious problems before you pay attention to issues which are not really a problem. That's one aspect. The other is that India is not central to US foreign policy. We should accept that. Even if in the Indo-Pacific area, we have an important role to play, we still are not central. Central to US foreign policy is what's happening in the Western Pacific. Its alliances with Japan and with South Korea, then with Philippines. The fact is that they have enormous number of troops deployed there, the military deployments, their 7th Fleet is there. or Sixth Fleet, whatever it is. They have bases there. Then they have troops in South Korea. North Korea is a problem. Taiwan is a problem. China is threatening constantly to take over Taiwan. US has certain responsibilities. They don't want those responsibilities to be tested. And therefore, they will continue to engage China, even as they consider China as a very big threat and need to be deterred. India does play a role in that. But it is not, again, an absolutely central role. It's a very important role, but not a central role. And therefore, we should be pretty objective as to where we stand with the United States. Then comes the other things. On trade, yes, we have become a big trade partner of the United States, $200 billion, but they have about $700 billion of trade with China and a huge trade, I forget the figure, but European Union is almost as big a partner of United States, and they have a lot of issues with the European Union.
And there's, of course, best buddy Musk, who has very big interests in China to protect also.
Exactly. Yes, iPhone has made some huge splash here because of the huge number of volume of exports that are going out from this country. But this is nothing compared to the kind of involvement the United States has in China. There is, of course, the issue of trade, as I mentioned, the question of deficit and this and that. This is a bit unfair. United States is $35 billion, whatever, 25 or 35 billion trillion dollar economy, the richest country in the world, with the huge trade and so many advantages they enjoy on the financial sector, with the dollar as their reserve currency, which gives them the capacity to control the international financial system. What happens in the United States in terms of inflation, their domestic policies, their rates and everything else starts affecting the entire world, including us. Therefore, to pick on us saying that we must reduce the trade deficit with a country like India, where the per capita income is about 30 times less than that of the United States, and which is genuinely a developing country, though in some areas we made good progress. Therefore, to attack us on that is a bit unfair. And then there is the larger issue of how they're treating the WTO. For the rest of the world, the Global South, especially the only organization on the trade side which is a guarantee for a rules-based economic order or a trade order is the WTO, which the United States is wrecking. On climate change, again, Trump has a certain policy which has repercussions for us, mind you, because the entire structure of climate change negotiations and meeting the target of 1.5 or whatever it is depends on transfers of technology and finances. And if Trump actually doesn't believe in climate change and says dig baby dig or drill baby drill and wants to actually drill in Greenland, notwithstanding the terribly fragile ecology of that area, then you can see that in terms of the core of the international agenda under the Paris Climate Change Agreement is not going to be abided by.
Okay, so let's open this up, because I'm getting pictures also from the US Capitol now, and you can see the Trump family, the entire family going in. You saw Mr. Trump going in with Biden, the outgoing president. You're also seeing, of course, pictures of an Indian immigrant to the United States who runs the entire Google, Sundar Pichai, talking very interestingly with Musk, who of course has backed this entire drive against immigration, the MAGA base, etc., etc. So interesting contrast visually there. But let me bring in Tom Rose. Tom Rose, Trump has made it his mission to initiate what he calls fair trade across the globe. And he has singled out the tariff regime, which he says makes certain countries benefit more, the cost of American industrial workers, etc., etc. How is he going to approach it? Is it going to be two-tiered? Is he saying, okay, we'll focus first on China, lower-hanging fruit. There is consensus on the Hill to go after China, but other countries like India, etc., let's take it a little slower. Or do you think he's going to throw the kitchen sink at both in one go. There are 100 executive orders that are expected to be put out in the next 24 hours. Is India going to find itself on the wrong side of one of them? Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Secondly, I think what the president will do later today, this evening, your time, is issue, as you indicated, a series of executive orders that will primarily focus on domestic U.S. issues. I thought the analysis by Mr. Jashinkar earlier was absolutely spot on, and that is that the first order priorities are those areas that trouble the president and impact negatively relationships with the United States. The fact that India is not really a first order priority, that's good news. It's good news for India, and it's good news for the United States. It's a signal that our relationship with India is strong, and it's going to get stronger. India is the largest democracy in the world. The president has an excellent relationship with your prime minister. That relationship, the president is focused and committed to personal relationships with our allies, even personal relationships with our adversaries and competitors. He has an outstanding, excellent working relationship with Prime Minister Modi. They're not only friends, they're partners. I think the president's inaugural address, which, as you indicated, will be given here in shortly over 1 hour, will mark the beginning of a new era for America's trade partners, a new era for American manufacturing, the sanctity and security of our borders. Here in the United States, we have lots of problems that were aggravated, accelerated, and put on high-speed disorder by the previous outgoing administration. The president more than has his hands full here at home, and the fact that India factors not as a first-order priority, that's good news. It's good news. Indians should be excited. They should be happy. There are problems in the bilateral relationship, just as surely as any close families have problems. The relationship that the U.S. has with India has some bumps in the road, but nothing that can't be successfully managed. And there's absolutely no indication whatsoever that our relationship with India, India's relationship with the United States, will do anything but improve.
So let me ask you this, Mr. Rose, before I bring in Mr. Sibbal. Will Trump continue to bear down on Russia further, making it more awkward for India, for example, to pursue its friendship with its old ally, perhaps down the line when he sort of turns his attention to foreign affairs?
Perhaps in the short term, but in the long term, again, I think that bodes well for India. I think the president's insistence on beginning a process to end this horrible war in Ukraine, these kinds of peace negotiations don't end in a day. They take time. They can be laborious. They can be drawn out. They can be very difficult. We can see an acceleration of fighting before there's an effective armistice or ceasefire. But the president's commitment to end the war, to win the peace, that means that India will, on the backside of that agreement, on the backside of that transaction, because the transaction will mean that there will have to be something done with American and European sanctions against Russia on a positive note for Russia, that India's relationship with Russia will improve. Again, I think it's good news. Maybe in the short term, it might not be immediate good news, but the president's focus and emphasis and commitment on bringing some kind of resolution to this horrific, unnecessary, tragic war will redound to India's benefit.
Well, I would love to be a fly on the wall there and hear what Bezos is saying to Pichai and Pichai is saying to Musk, and the little confabulation in the galleries that is taking place. That's interesting because, viewers, Trump 1.0 found himself at loggerheads with big tech. Now they seem to be sort of sitting in his camp, and I wouldn't say, except for Mr. Musk, fully supporting him, but definitely not in any way agnostic to him. They're slightly leaning towards him. So that's a big dramatic change. But Kamal Sibal, as we're getting these pictures from the galleries, the who's who of America packed in there, I have to ask you, we've talked a little bit about perhaps the awkward thorns in the relationship. Where are the meeting points?
The meeting points. The meeting points, is obviously on the strategic side, the challenge that China is posing to the United States and the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was espoused by Trump in his first term. And therefore, there is no reason why there should be any change in that, especially as his principal appointees are China hawks, declared China hawks. If you heard Mark Rubio's Senate hearings, it came out very clearly where he stands on the China threat. And both he and the NSA, they look upon India as a partner. And this partnership, in their mind, has as an axis the Indo-Pacific strategy, and together meeting the threat that is posed by China. Second is the whole area of critical and emerging technologies. Now there, the Biden administration was, to my mind, very sensible and forward-looking in teaming up with India's talent and capacities to jointly address the development of these critical and emerging technologies and wean ourselves away from China's domination in some of these critical areas. That interest of the United States will remain, though there are some doubts to the effect that Trump wants everything to be manufactured in United States itself, and therefore there may be more restrictions that are placed on transfers of technology from the United States to its partners and this and that. But I think that the wiser counsels will prevail. You see the kind of global capability centers that American corporations have built in India. With thousands of Indian technicians are working for them.
Yeah.
So the corporate sector is there. They are interested. They see what the prospects are, and they will therefore keep on, trying to dampen any effort on the part of Trump or others to try and clamp down a little bit on this part of the relationship. That's the second one. The third is that India is a rising power. Its economy is growing. There are huge opportunities for the American corporate sector in India,
right.
And therefore they are going to look ahead and see if they can keep on capitalizing on this potential. And in fact, on one part, help build up this potential and then benefit from it. So that will be the third commonality that we have. And then there is the other commonality, which is the Indian diaspora. It's 5 million, 4 million strong that is there in the United States. And they are playing a very important and critical role. And now more and more people of Indian origin are coming into the highest posts in the US administration. So to that extent, this reinforces the general impression and the message that India and the Indians are valuable partners. Finally, I think in the entire area of combating terrorism and Islamic extremism and everything else, there is again a commonality of interest between the two countries. How it expresses itself, that remains to be seen. But our problems with regard to terrorism and everything else, and United States' own fears and concerns, I think would provide a meeting ground for both of us to address this issue together.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. We're going to continue, of course, with this broadcast and another series of guests. Thank you, Mr. Sibal and Mr. Rose, for tuning in tonight with us. Those pictures, viewers, coming straight to you from the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol. That's the big building capped by this massive dome. That's the floor, really, of the Capitol. That's the House, the Senate, all of that area, which is going to today see a slightly modified oath-taking ceremony. It used to take place on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Now it's been brought inwards because of the extreme cold in America. And you can see the former presidents there in attendance, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, all there. Mrs. Obama, of course, wasn't seen with Mr. Obama coming in, so maybe she's not quite well, etc. But that's the Trump family, elements of the Trump family there. And of course, you saw all the big tech czars, Sam Altman, Zuckerberg, Musk, Pichai, and Bezos, all together in the gallery looking at this important moment in US history. Never before, viewers, has a president won so many things at one go. He literally has America at his feet. There is majority in both houses of parliament. This is very, very rare. He has a clean majority of the popular vote. He also has, of course, viewers, greater legitimacy because a large chunk of diverse Americans have voted for him. So in the sweepstakes of inclusivity, he can also suggest to people that, look, he has an advantage there too. But those are the pictures that are coming in, the who's who of America packing into this hall, historic building. It hasn't seen an inauguration in the recent past indoors, so this is a break from tradition. It also hasn't seen invites to foreign heads of state. So you've already seen people like Giorgia Meloni, who is the Italian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, several other top leaders, Javier Milei. All of these are heads of state, and of course India represented by Mr. S. Jaishankar, the foreign minister. But India has had some tricky moments with the Biden administration, which is outgoing, as have many other sovereign nations on socio-political issues. The outgoing US president proved to be susceptible to the views of left elements within his own party, prompting the White House and State Department to raise red flags over the state of democracy and the allegedly poor condition of minorities in India. Biden's critics often say that he conceded too much ground to the left and promoted a new woke ideology, softened the discourse on immigration, multiculturalism and gender, that he gave a long rope to non-state actors in the US to meddle in India affairs. That's what some people say. These included Soros's Open Society, sundry groups that were handing out gratuitous health certificates on the state of democracy in India, religious freedoms in India, gender relations in India, and other parts of the world. That this wide berth allowed, for instance, in the Indian context, Sikh and Muslim extremism to establish a toehold on US soil, having a direct impact on security on our soil. Now the culture warriors on the right want Trump to start battling the so-called, quote, woke virus, unquote, as they claim has infected the system, especially the deep state. Trump has vowed to drain the swamp. Let's open this up and have some interesting questions about how Trump is going to change the way he's going to look at the world and whether India will feel the impact at any level. So let's open this up. We're joined by Alex Dan. Nice to see you again. We also have strategic expert with us from the Wilson Center, Mr. Kugelman. We have senior fellow of the CRPC with us, IPCS with us, Mr. Ayyar Mitra. And we also have a journalist to give his perspective, Spencer Critchley, very well heralded journalist from the United States. Mr. Critchley, very quickly, culture wars, big question, woke, I don't know what to call it, but this is what the Americans seem to suggest of a particular persuasion. It's a woke virus. First of all, what does all this mean?
Yes, the Americans of a particular persuasion being Donald Trump supporters. I think this is a very important distinction to make and to undo the conflation of so-called wokeness with liberalism, which is the philosophy underpinning liberal democracy. India was founded as a liberal democracy in 1947. The United States was founded as the first liberal democracy. Liberalism is not wokeness. In fact, wokeness is explicitly anti-liberal, as is Trumpism. They are attacks on liberalism from the left, from the anti-liberal left in the case of wokeness, and the anti-liberal right in the case of Trumpism or MAGA. It's to Trump's advantage to try to confuse wokeness with liberalism. But liberals, and I mean people from the right to the left who believe in the philosophy of liberalism, the philosophy of individual freedom and equality and democratic self-government, they need to do a better job of defending liberalism. Liberalism is under attack around the world, and excuse me, I think liberalism is somewhat endangered in your country as well. It's in grave danger in my country. That, I think, is a very important distinction to make here. And when Joe Biden talks about things like human rights, whether in the United States or in other countries, you might agree or disagree with the individual point he's making, but he's not being woke. He's defending the fundamental values of democracy, which is liberal democracy in the broad-based sense, which, as I say, goes from the left to the right.
Ayer Mitra, would you like to respond?
Look, there's nothing even remotely liberal about the Biden administration. Let's be very clear about that. We have never seen a more disastrous misuse of the law, consistent lawfare that has been used against the former president and his people around him ever. Biden succeeded in making America look like a third world tin pot dictatorship. You'd expect this in Uganda, maybe in Kenya or things like that, but certainly not in America. You know, we were always taught the very definition of why America was different, why the FBI was different from the KGB, is because the KGB could always go into a hotel, see what you were up to, demand its records to see if you had an affair or something, and then prosecute you. In America, you had to come across it. We saw all those red lines wiped out during Biden. Today, he has gone and pardoned the Jan 6th committee. He's gone and pardoned Anthony Fauci. And mind you, there is actual US Supreme Court judgment, Berdwick versus the United States, which clearly states that a presumptive pardon presumptively assumes guilt. The sheer impunity with which you have seen governments the Biden administration violate every single shred of American law. Immigration, another classic case. They keep confusing, legal immigration with illegal immigration. They said immigrants made this country great. True, legal immigrants made that country great, not illegal immigration. Remember, illegality is fungible. One route of illegality always becomes other routes of illegality. The same tracks used to smuggle in illegal immigrants are used to smuggle in drugs. And let's not pretend America doesn't have a drug problem. This is the classic kind of goalpost shifting we've seen throughout this previous administration, be it censorship, be it terrorizing its opponents, its political opponents. What liberalism remotely have we seen with the Biden administration? It has been an extreme far left woke ideology, trumpeting talking points that we thought died with the USSR. But oh no, that's
If I may, it's difficult to debate a series of assertions that are completely unsupported by the facts.
I'm sorry, I've not
make all kinds
yet.
of
I have
dramatic
not
assertions.
I have
One
not
can make all
yet.
sorts of dramatic assertions
I have not
of any
yielded
kind.
yet.
But
Now, this man
the
can
facts
go around
Okay, no,
contradict
hang on, just a minute.
everything we just heard.
Just a minute,
So I'd
gentlemen.
like to, I'd like to see some.
Let's
I'd like to
not-
hear
let's
some
not-
evidence. that
Okay, let's not
supports-
snipe at each other
Excuse me,
across.
I waited to allow you
For
to
him to
finish,
come
sir.
here, he's just being
I
mendacious.
would like
Okay,
to
okay,
hear
one
some
second,
evidence
gentlemen,
that
let's not
actually
get personal. I'll have to
supports
know
any
your
of these
feelings.
Mendacious.
Gentlemen, please.
If you want to
let's-
try to shout over me, we can
No,
have
please,
a shouting
just
contest. but I'm
excuse
not
me.
going
Let
to
me
shout.
let me
Don't
handle
come
this
and
I would
debate.
like to
tell me I'm
hear-
Mr. Critchley, Mr. Iyer, please, let's just calm down. 30 seconds, please take a pause. We didn't want to go here. People have a point of view. They're expressing it. Let me just bring in others for two or 3 minutes to calm this situation
I
down.
hope we can have a discussion based on evidence, and
Yes.
I hope it will
Okay.
be civil.
Okay.
But wild assertions that are contradicted by
okay.
the evidence are not going to do
Your
anybody
Mr.
any
assertions
good.
are
Critchley, it's his
wild.
point of view. You've got yours. I'll allow you in. Don't worry. Let's just open this up. 30 seconds, please. Let's all take a deep breath. Mr. Kugelman, I'm sorry about this, but I need to come out to you. There is a view here in India that several US politicians on the left-leaning Democrat side, and I'm not talking about the woke side or anything like that, I'm just talking about slightly more left elements within the Democrat side of the fence. For example, gratuitously tweeted in favor of protesting farmers, hobnobbed with leaders of the Indian opposition, especially Rahul Gandhi, created a bit of a ripple here at the time when Modi was visiting America. Red flag so-called Islamophobia in India. Is that all going to be now consigned to the back benches? Is that all history, or is that still going to rear its head in different quarters?
Oh, that's politics, and that's democracy. And some of these, or many of these progressive Democrats that you were alluding to are still in office. They're going to be reporting for duty on Capitol Hill, and they'll express the views that they choose to express. But certainly, I think that the mood will be different now that, as was noted before, the leadership on Capitol Hill on both sides is going to be very different. And I think that you're going to have newer voices with different views dominating debates on many levels. But when it comes to some progressive Democrats expressing views about India that might not be received well, I mean, that's just the way it works. And I don't think that we should overstate the impact that will have on, say, U.S. relations with India in the Trump era. But I just wanted to very quickly go back to some points that were made earlier. One in particular, in evaluating Biden, I think it's important to take the focus abroad. I remember when Biden first took office, people were talking about him and his administration being one of the most experienced in foreign policy of any presidency the U.S. had seen for many years, and yet it is very strikingly ironic that he will be remembered, unfortunately, I think, for some major foreign policy failures that, in some cases might have cost the Democratic Party the election. Starting with the Afghanistan withdrawal, it was botched, and this happened very early on in Biden's administration. And then toward the end of his administration, how he handled the war in Gaza. And so I think this is just, again, very striking, given the experience that Biden and so many of his deputies had on foreign policy issues for so many years. And yet, when it comes to his legacy, how he'll be remembered, I think that even many of his supporters will acknowledge that there were some really significant errors or miscalculations made on the foreign policy front.
Well, a couple of them were, of course, the sudden evacuation from Afghanistan. And many people say regime change in Bangladesh. Now, if I were to pick up on Mr. Iyer Mitra, he'd say that's not liberal at all. When you go in and interfere in another state's democratic setup, whether you agree with it or not, regime change is never really something that is in contiguity with any constitutional values.
Is that to me?
Yes, Mr. Kugelman. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, my view is that there's no evidence whatsoever that the U.S. was involved in the change of government and the mass movement in Bangladesh. And I know that there's a very different view among many there in India. So I wouldn't put that in the same category, though certainly one could argue that U.S. policy in Bangladesh, which consisted of a lot of vocal criticism of the Hasina government, led to an election that was not free and fair, which is what the Biden administration had been saying it wanted to see.
Right.
So I think that that one could argue didn't succeed either. If the U.S. had hoped that by using Bangladesh as a test case for its democracy promotion policy, which, as we know, was used very selectively around the world, then it was not successful. But I don't put Bangladesh on my list. One could talk about Ukraine. To an extent, the Biden administration tried very hard to stop Putin from invading Ukraine. One could argue who could have stopped him, but the U.S. did try very hard. It didn't succeed. That was another disappointment as well. So, unfortunately, a number of disappointments to look at on the foreign policy front.
Okay, Alex Dan, let me bring you in before I go back to Spencer Critchley and Abhijit Mitra. Alex Dan, woke virus, draining the swamp. What do these terms mean? Will they have a foreign policy dimension or an impact on foreign policy at any level? We have suffered, according to one narrative here in India, interference from people like George Soros, etc., people who've sort of wanted to spread all sorts of lies about the current administration in power here in India. Will all that sort of now, at some level or the other, be tempered in the United States with Trump's coming?
It's a turning of the tide, Rahul. This is a changing of the guard in Washington, D.C., not just from one administration to the next, but a change in ideology. You can call it a woke mind virus. I call it an ideology. This globalist ideology that has guided the Biden administration, that guided the Obama administration 2 terms before that has guided other politicians in the United States of America, that comes to an end today. This is day one of a new reality. The globalist mentality that there are 0 borders and an infinite number of genders has been disproven by the voters of the United States of America. That was the message in November that voters were sending. And we see from President Trump these planned actions that we're expecting within the next few hours on the first day of his administration, the first hours of his administration, are targeted toward the border. That is no accident. Trump's voters and individuals from India to the UK to Germany to across this world want borders reestablished, and are tired of being told that respecting a border makes you racist. It doesn't. It means you can read a map. It means you respect territorial integrity. This has been at the vanguard of this globalist push for 30 years. This scene here in the US Capitol means that the voters of the United States are finally, firmly turning the tide against him and against his cronies who are perpetuating that mind virus across the world.
Mr. Critchley, you wanted to come in.
I'd like to draw another very important distinction, in my opinion. It's entirely legitimate for voters to decide that they want a less, as it's called, globalist kind of approach in the United States and a more populist one that Trump supposedly represents. Trump with his Billionaire Boys Club joining him on stage while his supporters freeze in the cold outside. But that remark aside, it is entirely democratically legitimate for voters to vote for dramatic changes in policy and overall strategy for the United States. I want to draw a distinction between that and what's happening today with the inauguration again of Donald Trump. The concern there, the overriding concern there, is not any particular policy, assuming those policies are implemented legally. It's authoritarianism and criminality. Donald Trump tried to overthrow American democracy and has continued to try to do that ever since. He is on tape attempting to extort famously 11,780 extra votes from the Secretary of State of Georgia to overthrow the election. He conducted a multi-pronged assault on the election of 2020, not just on January 6, 2021, but for months and months ahead of time. This and his criminality, well, it's been adjudicated in court. He's the first convicted felon ever to be elected president of the United States. But even if you don't like that verdict, there are just endless examples of him trying to extort Zelensky way back to try to invent dirt on Joe Biden back when he was running against Biden. The list goes on and on. His entire career has been a career of what we call grifting in the United States. If there's one thing he's successful at, is that he's history's most successful con man. So as I say, one can agree or disagree with his policies, and that's just democracy in action, that if the voters choose those policies, that's a legitimate choice. The problem here is he's an authoritarian who is attacking democracy, and he's a criminal.
Okay. Ayyar Mitra, your response to that, and how is that going to play out internationally, if at all?
I don't respond to lies. It's just a barrage of lies, a farrago of distortions. It's pointless responding to it. I'm not going to grace it with
Okay, so let me ask you this question, because it's important. At the end of the day, there was an impression created here in India, and this is widely reported, that the government feels that perhaps there was a larger monopoly of non-state actors that were involved in some way or the other with the Biden regime to try and put pressure on India on certain issues that it found troubling. Do you think all of those levers that were used allegedly by the Biden regime, is that now all gone? Is it all over?
No, it's not gone, and it won't go completely. Remember, the American system is a bit like the Augustan system. Everything depends on the emperor, you see. When you have a president in this case who is not completely all there for anything more than 1 or 2 hours a day, you can't, synthesize all the silos. All governments work at cross purposes. In this particular case, you had silos like Jake Sullivan and Gina Raimondo, who were extremely pro-India, doing lots of things to improve the relationship. And you had silos like Blinken and co, who were pointlessly needling, I would say, almost in an undiplomatic way. You have verifiable money trails to certain media outlets of US aid giving them money, of the US embassy giving them money. This was clearly demonstrated by the BJP itself. The Americans never denied it. They put out nobody wanted to face it at the embassy out here. they came and put out an extremely weakly worded statement, just an emailed statement. They didn't want to address it. They didn't want to talk about it. What does that say about it?
So are you saying now that's all history, or will that continue? I'm trying to understand that.
It depends on lots of factors. It depends on how much of this wastage of money, of US taxpayers' money, on pointless NGOs. What is the point of a non-governmental organization if it has to survive on government handouts? That destroys the whole point of an NGO, you see? So it depends on what what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy do on the one hand. How much are they going to cut? How much of this wastage of taxpayer money are they going to cut? And on the other hand, how much we tighten up our own laws against this kind of technically foreign money coming to NGOs has to go through the FCRA Act. We have not implemented that act properly. There is a implementation lacuna in India.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for speaking with me this evening. Sorry it got a little testy back there, but hopefully we can set that aside. Viewers, those pictures, live pictures now from Capitol Hill, all the ex-presidents been ceremoniously greeted and asked to take their positions in that grand hall framed by massive paintings of important events in American history. You can see those beautiful canvases up there. You can also see the big podium where the oath taking is going to take place. You see the aisle open, and we're expecting Trump and Melania Trump to both come through. But before that, of course, we will see J.D. Vance and his wife Usha Vance taking oath. We're going to take a very short break, viewers. We're right back. Don't go away.
Presented by